Senator Gatti, welcome to House Labor, and Madam Attorney, SB 107.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Senate Bill. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, Senate Bill number 107 by Senators Gatti, Bishop, Carter, and Johns, relative to financial security for certain public employees, to provide for workers' compensation, to provide for certain fire employees, to provide for certain volunteer firefighters, to provide for certain emergency medical service personnel, to provide for certain employees of police departments, to provide for certain employees of state police, to provide for post-traumatic stress disorder as a compensable injury when the injury is suffered by certain employees, to provide for definitions, to provide for legal presumptions, to provide for rebuttal evidence, and to provide for related matters.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Senator Gatti, on your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you hearing our bill today, and we have a few witnesses who've come quite a long way to speak of their experience with PTSD. I'll just simply say that the push of this bill from firemen across the nation and our firemen who contacted me is this was not my idea. The firemen from all over the state contacted me, and we all have fire departments in our district and police officers in our district, and of course we all enjoy the security of the state police while we're here at the Capitol. PTSD has a long history. I'll be very brief, but in World War II, when folks would get upset and they saw their friends pass away, they would, they passed out cartons of cigarettes to calm them down. And later in Vietnam and Korea, we had widespread alcohol and drug use to kind of suppress the feelings of PTSD. It wasn't until later, Desert Storm and some other things that happened, that our doctors began to realize that there's something to this. In the old days, we'd just say, suck it up, buttercup, man up. And that became not really a good coping skill to teach people. And since Desert Storm and some other wars, we have seen some of our good men and women who have gone through treatment for PTSD. And the rule of treatment is that if you catch it early and you treat it early, then it's not permanent. I'll say that again. If you treat it early, then it's not permanent. And we have folks here today, some who received treatment early, so it wasn't permanent. And we're going to hear from some folks that didn't receive treatment early, and they're still struggling with some of the demons of PTSD. But once again, this bill is focused on our firemen, our policemen. Those are the folks that run in while we're running out. And those are the guys that see things that we should never see. They see death. They see burn-up bodies. They see dead babies. I say those things not to shock you, just because I know these guys, they testify in the Senate, they have a tough time talking about it, so I'm going to talk about it. And that changes their brain. It changes their chemistry in their brain. Most recently under the DSM-5, which is the desk reference book for mental disorders in our state and our nation, different factors for PTSD have been vetted out and handed down. If you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist, you've had training on the DSM. It's your Bible when it comes to diagnosing mental disorders. And the DSM-5 clearly shows whether or not someone is qualified to receive treatment for PTSD or PTSI. Well, what happens if we don't treat it? Let's just talk about the practical aspect of how we've been working on this. There was a fireman up in northeast Louisiana, north central Louisiana, and he was working a wreck. During the time of his duties in that wreck, he had to put some kids in a car that was stopped behind, and he began to work the wreck. He turned around to watch that one of the kids had jumped out of the car, ran out to the street, and was run over and killed right in front of him. And that's tough for anybody to watch, but the firemen and policemen have what's called a cumulative factor. And they also have something that I just call a straw that breaks the camel's back experience, and that's when they just saw that one thing too much. Might be a big thing, might be a small thing, but it pushes them over the edge. As he filed his claim and got with his chief, and most men will not go to their chief and say, hey, I've got a problem. Chief, I hadn't been the same. We finally went to his chief, and he saw what was wrong. They started the process, and it's workers' compensation of filing a claim and getting the help. And he was basically told, you signed up for this. You signed up for this. You're not a bank teller, you're a fireman. Suck it up. And that wasn't from the chief. That was from trying to file the workers' compensation claim. Well, firemen and policemen deserve to be treated a little differently, especially our firemen when it comes to cancer. A few years ago, we passed unanimously a cancer bill. The cancer bill basically said that it's a presumption that firemen, because of all the stuff they breathe in, that they're going to have a higher instance of lung cancer, brain cancer, testicular cancer, ovarian cancer, and those cancers that are caused early on in life by inhalation of bad chemicals. Well, there's also PTSD. You know, some folks will go off to war and they'll say things maybe 5, 10, or 15 years. And we know that's a very tough load on the mind. But our firemen and our policemen see things every day over their whole career. So there is a high impact of impressions that lead to what we see as a higher than normal true diagnosis, not a fake diagnosis, a true diagnosis of PTSD inside of this people group. So what the bill basically does is it says if a fireman or policeman goes and sees a psychologist, and that board-certified psychologist uses the DSM, and they go through about the 25 factors A through H of what the DSM says, and they deem that that person is struggling with or diagnosed with PTSD, then the burden shifts to the insurance company to prove they don't have PTSD from a job-related item. We use presumptions in the law all the time. One of my favorite ones is that the child born of the marriage is presumed to be the child of the father. That's a lot of times with DNA testing, we've shown we can rebut that presumption with a DNA test. But we have a lot of presumptions in the law that make judicial hearings very efficient. I know when I served as a workers' compensation judge for 2 years, I liked it when folks would assert a presumption, because it meant everybody in the room already agreed ahead of time that this item didn't need a long hearing, that a predicate fact was there and the inference could be made by the judge. And what's really unique about presumptions in Louisiana is that they tend to reveal the truth. They tend to reveal the truth. So the burden shift is a big deal for our firemen, really for two reasons, legally and practically. Legally, it lets them get the treatment they need, and it lets it get them early. And when they get early treatment for PTSD, it's not permanent. Secondly, it reduces the cost of the process. The fireman does not need to go hire an attorney and file a 1008 or battle for one psychological visit. They can simply get the treatment they need and get back to work. PTSD is not disabling if it is caught early. We had that debate in the Senate, and that's why we, at an abundance of compromise, took out any notion of any retirement benefits for PTSD disability. And Senator Peacock worked with us very diligently so the bill could get over here, and there wouldn't be any actuarial note attached to it. In fact, our last actuarial note stated there would be zero impact if this bill passed on the retirement system. So with that, that's just broad strokes, Mr. Chairman, but we'd like to have Matt Kinney testify and Audrey Lowry testify, who came here from Halton and Bossier.
Yes, thank you all for coming, but we do have a technical amendment. And Representative Cox will offer that technical amendment. Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this amendment number is 2787. It is purely technical. We're just changing post-traumatic to one word to be in line with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders by American Psychiatric Association. And we have some citation changes. Thank you.
Representative Cox has offered said amendment as a technical amendment to this piece of legislation. Is there any discussion? Any questions? Any objection? That amendment is adopted. Representative Bagley, real quickly.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was just, some of you, especially firemen, know Jack Canton, served here in Baton Rouge. His son, and I just got this Rusty Canton, who's the fire chief of Logansport District, committed suicide just a few minutes ago. So again, that's, I guess, this is a pretty good place to say this, because this is where we're kind of taught. Yes, same. I live right down the street from him. Know his wife, his children. I taught them. For me, it's a pretty personal deal for me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if we have a moment of silence and allow Representative Bagley to lead us in a short prayer?
I was just about to ask that Senator Gatti a moment of silence for that family on the service that was given. If we could stand, Representative Bagley.
Our Father, thank you for bringing together. Bless this family and Cantons. and the many people in Logansport that are touched by that this morning, firemen that serve daily, that know the Cantons and the situation they've been through. We ask your.
Thank you, Representative Bagley. Our blessings upon that family and that community. Yes, sir. As we compose ourselves, if you would introduce yourself, and we appreciate your coming here and for what you do every day.
Thank you. My name is Matt Kinney. I work with the Bossier City Fire Department. I've been with Bossier City for 19 years. I am also a chaplain with 3 other departments. And the PTSD is something that is dear to my heart. And I want to thank you, Representative Bagley, for mentioning that today. I had several phone calls inside when we were here. I had to get up and leave, so thank you. I want to say this for a brand new rookie fireman. His first month, he's probably going to see more death than most people will in their whole life. We make thousands of runs a year, and some of these are very traumatic runs. And as Senator Gatti said, we had to suck it up. And a lot of the firemen would use substance abuse. Our divorce rate with firefighters is through the roof. We would take drugs, just trying to cope. And lastly, suicide. Our suicide numbers for the past few years are higher than our line of duty deaths between firefighters and police officers. And not only that, we're running on each other now when one of us commits suicide. And we're seeing these things. What we're asking is we put things in place to try to help. We started critical incident stress, peer support. What we're asking for from y'all is that last step that we need to get them the help, psychologists, professional help that we can't do. So we're presenting this because we know there's a problem. We can't say anymore that it's just going to go away because our numbers are rising. Our firefighters, our police officers are dying. And lastly, they're losing jobs because they don't have the support or the means that they need. So we're asking y'all for help on this. That's what we're needing.
I have a question from Representative Cox.
Wait till they finish.
Okay. If you could press your button again, Representative Cox. Representative Seaball.
You can go ahead and let the last gentleman testify.
Okay, I didn't realize we had another person testifying. Go ahead. And hit your button again, please.
My name's Archer Lowry, captain with Benton Fire Department. I'm here to share my story today. I did suffer from depression, from collaboration of all the runs, from the experiences that I have experienced while being on the fire department. What I'm here to let everybody know is you can get treated, and it is a very successful program that I went to, and now I am able to be the dad, the husband, and the fireman that I need to be because of the treatment that I received at an early stage. Not only that, I coach archery. Benton Middle School, we won nationals last weekend. And I have a young lady who has CP that shot, and she shot the highest score she's ever shot. So without me receiving the treatment and being able to come back to be the man that I know and want to be, I don't know if these accomplishments would have been made at this particular point in time. My reasoning for being here is firemen need to have awareness. There needs to be some a way for everybody to explain it to each other, to identify it within the fire station. I didn't know what depression was. It's a very slow moving disease. It snuck up on me, and I didn't realize the person that I had become. thank God I made a decision to go get treatment, and I feel I feel like it was a success. So that's all. That's my testimony for today.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir. If you could introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. My name is Chief Clay Morgan. I'm with the Mound Fire Protection District in Madison Parish. I'm here today to talk to y'all about what I kind of went through. In 2015 or 2014, I began experiencing symptoms of PTSD. It had gone on for a long time before that, and I had suppressed it and suppressed it and suppressed it. I finally reached out to somebody. I reached out to basically the wrong person, and they put me off work. Told me that I needed to get my stuff together. At that time, I wasn't ready, because when you're not ready to do something, you're just not ready. So I stayed off work for 9 months, and in that 9th month that I was off on my 364 days of sick leave, I attempted to commit suicide. Going through this. At the time, I was on 17 different medications trying to suppress what was going on. Didn't want help, didn't want to get help. Well, that night when the gun clicked and it didn't go off, I woke up and I went and got help. And as Senator Gatti said, if you catch it early, you can do something about it. Well, I didn't catch it early, so now I'm stuck with it for the rest of my life. If it wasn't for me working for the state and me having state insurance, my medication alone would be over $3,000 a month just to keep me alive. My treatment continues to this day. I see a therapist twice a month, and we continue to work out the problems that I had with what I've seen. And I can assure you that it was some bad stuff. We work on it. We work on it twice a month, and there is a cost with that too. So it is a continuing cost. My initial treatment, I did not have workman's comp at that time. I was not offered workman's comp at that time for it, and I spent out of my own pocket. I spent over $50,000 out of my own pocket to get myself back to the situation where I could serve the people of the state of Louisiana. So that's my testimony, and thank you for letting me be here today.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
you so much. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name is Derek Lowe. I'm a lieutenant with the Jefferson Parish Fire Department. I've been there for 16 years. I'm here to share my story today. I'm one of the people that didn't catch it early, so I will live with this forever. Even being here today, hearing the zippers of briefcases in this room has raised my anxiety. It causes me flashbacks and body bags. 2018 was a horrible year for me because I lived in fear of not knowing what was going on with me, as well as fear of losing my job, which is why I didn't seek treatment. It wasn't until January 10th of this year that things got so bad for me trying to self-medicate with alcohol that I just couldn't look myself in the mirror anymore. I was willing to lose a job if that was the outcome, but I wasn't going to lose my family. So I checked into rehab, paid for it myself, used my own sick leave. And I stayed there for 30 days, and I still see a doctor weekly. I take medicine. It's not going to go away. I'm one of the people that if I didn't have that fear and I would have went and got treatment earlier, I would be in a different predicament today. It's a real deal. I didn't know anything about PTSD until I got to the recovery center I went to. It wasn't until about 14 days in that it was suggested to me by a doctor. When it was suggested to me if I was aware of PTSD, I immediately said, yeah, that's a common problem with combat veterans. And he said, it's not just combat veterans. I still have trouble acknowledging it and accepting it, but the doctors there gave me that diagnosis. When I got back to New Orleans and I was ready to go back to work, I went and saw the department psychiatrist who concurred with the treatment center's diagnosis and stated in her report that she not only agreed but felt it was 100% job related and should be treated as such. However, because I didn't file a workman's comp claim and use my own sick leave, it just went in the file and I was approved to go back to work, and I've been at work since. I struggled with filing a workman's comp claim because I didn't want my privacy violated by having to tell everybody. That was a big concern for me. To admit you have a problem as a firefighter is not something we like to do, especially as an officer. I have firefighters with less tenure than me that put their lives in my hand. They expect me to make the right judgment call inside a fire, and there's a trust with that. So I was also concerned that I would lose that trust. The doctor treating me now has also agreed with that diagnosis and confirmed. So I have 3 doctors that have confirmed the PTSD diagnosis. I finally filled out the paperwork for a claim the more I've been educated on it. I did an hour-long interview with the workman's comp people that represent Jefferson Parish, and at the closing, the person on the phone told me neither she nor her supervisor knew how to handle the case, and she would have to get back to me, and I have yet to hear back from them. It's tough. I've learned a lot about this disease and diagnosis, and I was raised, suck it up. I'm the son of a Marine. We didn't grow up with feelings. But I was also the case of the straw broke the camel's back. I stayed in Katrina for 14 days straight, from landfall plus 14 days. That didn't break the back. It ended up being a mosquito that flew down my throat last year on the scene from a corpse. And that's my story. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Has Danny Adams, Autry, Lowry, everybody's, Mark Stewart, Matt Kinney, and Chad Major.
I believe Autry, Lowry, and Matt Kinney have
already spoken. Okay. Good afternoon now, gentlemen. If you would introduce yourselves, and welcome to House Labor.
Danny Adams. I'm a retired assistant fire chief here in Baton Rouge. Retired. I'm a master peer support trainer, also master suicide prevention intervention trainer. I've also served the state of Louisiana under Katrina, Louisiana Spirit Hurricane program to serve our citizens under the FEMA and SAMHSA grant in Louisiana. I've been doing that ever since. I'm here as a former firefighter. We had, after Katrina, PTSD was all over. 6 to 9 months after Katrina, LSU Health Sciences Center was saying they expect no decrease in PTSD. No decrease. You just heard this officer spoke right before me saying that, they're living in trailers. They're working in trailers. They've worked in the water. They've seen dead bodies. They picked up dead bodies. As a peer support, I was assigned by my chief here in Baton Rouge. He said, what are we doing for our brothers and sisters? So I was in charge of not only firefighters, police officers, paramedics, military. The first thing I would ask a first responder is, how's your family? Because that should be the first thing you ask a first responder. Not how are you doing, how's your family? Because that's who they work for. They're working for their family. Access to mental health is almost nil to none. It's not that some areas have good services or bad services, it's the stigma the stigma associated with trying to get help. Until we get something like this bill passed, this is going to help break that stigma, help people get to services. I don't want a police officer. I didn't tell you this. I come from a line of police officers. My father was a retired police captain. My brother's a retired police captain. I had another brother who worked crime scene. Had another brother who was a Marine, but also he was on the other side of the bars sometimes. So I work in the first responder family. I saw the alcoholism. I saw what it did to my father and my brother. My brother's still alive today. He shouldn't be alive today, but he's alive today. But he suffered PTSD in the police department. It's what we see every day. You can't unsee, untouch, unhear, unsmell all those things that you experience. That never goes away. Never. I don't know if you've all had any traumatic experiences in your lives, but you never forget those. I remember the first day I did CPR on a baby that died, the same age as my daughter. That was hard. The only thing that helped me was I had a good captain. I did everything that the book says a firefighter, or a police officer, or a paramedic would do. They removed themselves from the crew because they didn't want to presume to be weak. Because we had this armor. We had this armor that we put on. We have an expectation to do our jobs. We have an expectation to be there on that worst scene. I've been to car wrecks on the interstate to help after the fact, and listen to these first responders having to pick up kids out of a swamp and hear their story. It's not that I have to hear it. I'm honored to hear it. I'm honored to be a brother.
Yes, sir.
So just a couple more things. Our divorce rate is over 70% because of our exposure. First responders have a 47 to 48% ideation rate for suicide because of PTSD. And 20% of us suffer from PTSD because we're associated with soldiers as to the trauma that we see every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Mark Stewart, I'm here representing the Louisiana Fire Chiefs Association. I just wanted to come and say that the Fire Chiefs Association at our convention and membership meeting a couple of months ago in Bossier City overwhelmingly decided as an organization that we would support this legislation. So I believe our president had sent a letter, an email to all members of our legislature. But I wanted to come down here personally as our representatives and let you know that the fire chiefs are behind this. We understand the different sides of it, and a lot of us are the old guys that came along back when there was no treatment and no PTSD recognition and that stuff. And a lot of us have over the years treated our people with the essence of, suck it up and just something you have to deal with. But we're trying to become a kinder and gentler chiefs in this day and age, and we understand that the PTSD is prevalent. We see it all over, different departments, large, small. It doesn't matter. It doesn't discriminate amongst the people in our profession, us along with law enforcement. So I just wanted to be here personally to let you know that the Louisiana Fire Chiefs does 100% support this legislation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Just before you, yes, Representative Falconer on personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As it happens, we all thought we were coming here to just talk about workers' comp, and this has obviously become a big discussion about behavioral health. And today is Behavioral Health Day at the Capitol. There are mental health providers all over the building right now, and I would just ask everybody in here, when you see one, thank them, because it's a hard job. And Mike, a director of the NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness chapter in St. Tammany Parish, is here in the room with us, and I wanted to recognize Nick Richard in the back. He is about the best resource for mental health services, I think, in the state, but for sure in St. Tammany Parish. And Nick, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because my wife is the past president of the NAMI chapter in St. Tammany, that we're having the NAMI walk at the Mandeville Lakefront on Saturday. So if you're in the area, please come join us. Thank you. Thanks, Nick, for being here.
Thank you, Representative Falconer. We do have a question. Just Representative Cox, is your question?
Okay, thank you. I want to start out by saying that I've been wondering why this has not happened beforehand. Because probably no one in this building knows more about it than I probably have seen, dealt with, and the way you struggle with this thing. To be a leader, you cannot be the one showing fear, so you're in another situation. The point is it's prevention. Prevention. Because someone says that I saw something, that means there are groups. And let me say this, did you know that if by doing this, prevention is not talking to some guy in some white coat. You got to talk to guys who've been who's dealing with that and on the edge. And sir, I didn't catch your name, but don't be ashamed of anything. I'm going to tell you, with me, it was God. So I'm telling you, if you got to have something bigger than you. I'm explaining this to you. You have to have something bigger than you. Because what happens is, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, is I differ with the aspect of saying that you catch it and it's over with. I don't believe that. Because once you've killed somebody, or once you've seen somebody fish somebody out, or you take a 19-year-old who's got to go out and bring body parts back, and once y'all do that, one of the worst things I ever seen was the firefighters who came and got some girls in Mansfield, Natchitoches, Louisiana. I never will, and the smell and all these things they zipped them in a bag, except for they were twins, and we couldn't find the other one because I was there with them. Something I said, well, let's go. I was talking with firemen. Said, have y'all looked in the bag? And everybody was dreading them. And they zipped it open. They hugged themselves, and that's how it ended. Those things never go away in your mind. And don't be ashamed of them, because what happens is the fear of losing your job. I heard that. And that's what you do. You think that we're weak because we can't, because you go talk to somebody. I have a great wife who tells me, she listened to what I had to say, and she says, "No, I didn't marry a whiner," and I love her for that. But then when you get to the point, if you don't stop this, and if you give me the leeway, please, because I'm this and Gatti, because what's going to happen here, you will start to then separate from your family. Because when you stop talking to your kids, or you treat them like dogs, or whatever, I saw my soldiers do, and I started identifying it early, and I went with them. Leadership has to take a role in this. And leadership has to go down and grab this guy and talk. I had a guy lost some terrible happened. I won't even explain it. And my chaplain who worked for me, he was trying to tell him. And when I came into the building afterwards, I didn't have anything to say. So I grabbed him and I cried with him. The shortest Bible verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. So I'm telling you, and that separation's through drugs, the drugs to self-medicate yourself. I had so many guys doing that. For me, it was that I couldn't stand it. And one man is taking a lot of drugs. Please. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, because the drugs that they give us sometimes is just so, it can do things to you. So the separation, and then finally suicide. But I will tell you, and when you talk to your guys, please talk to them about there's no shame in this, and that you need to continue to go to, and people meet about AA and all of that stuff. This stuff that you go through, I heard somebody say the smell, y'all brought back battle to me, you know, the smell of fire and gun smoke and all these different things. So what I'm saying to you is there's no shame in it. Get help. Prevention is the key. And the departments, to include the police force. And I think we should be working together on this thing, all of them. And I'll leave it at that. And at the appropriate time, I want to move forward on this bill.
Thank you, Representative Cox. Chad.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, members, my name is Chad Major. I've been on the Baton Rouge Fire Department for 30 years, 344 days. And I'm still there. I'm also fortunate enough to be elected by my cohorts to represent them and their issues statewide. This bill isn't an R, D, and I bill. This bill isn't a black-white bill. This bill isn't a north-south bill. This bill is a people bill. When we first drafted this bill, we included fire, municipal police, sheriff, state police, EMS workers, and volunteers. Along the way, the sheriffs asked to be taken out. They have their own thing that they want to do over there on their side. So respectfully, I mean, of course, they wanted out. I said, okay. So we tried to encompass everyone. And being here that long, and Representative Cox, to answer your question that you first started off with, why, why not say anything and why now? It's about time, so to speak. This is a new thing that is coming out of the closet, I guess you would say. And 31 years on the job. When I first went to work there, that was the attitude. Get over it, suck it up. You get back to the station, you know what you would do? Make fun of it. Make fun of things that you would offend somebody so much that they would overheard us. Of course, that was before cell phones and cameras and everything else. I think probably more careful today. But it was our way of dealing or coping with it. And you just didn't show that weakness. Brother Lowe said he's a lieutenant in Jefferson. He says he don't want to show his crew that weakness. Representative Cox understands this. When you're leading people in the battle of fighting a fire, in the battle of trying to arrest someone who just robbed a bank or whatever the case may be, and you're that leader, you don't want to show that weakness. You want to be strong for your men. Then when you get home as that individual person, you want to be strong for your family. And at the same time, you internalize those things. I was guilty of that. I would tell you of a call that I made with 5 years on the job. And the call came in as a woman in labor. Okay, I've done that. I've delivered 4 children during my career. So, no big deal. So we get there, and there are 4 children standing there. And this lady's laying on the couch. It's in an apartment complex off of Florida Boulevard. And I said, well, how you doing? And most of you know me personally, know I got some funny quip or something like that to kind of ease the moment and, kind of relax everything. And she said, I don't know. And I said, are these your children? And I guess the oldest one was around 6 years old. And she goes, yeah, all 4 of them. I said, well, you're old pro at this. We're good. I said, how far along are you? She goes, I just started my 2nd trimester. I said, well, you're good. She goes, my water broke. So I'm sitting there thinking, I said, well, EMS will be here soon and we'll get you to the hospital. She goes, no, this baby's coming now. So the child was stillborn. So I clamped the umbilical cords. I cut the umbilical cord. The children there, they didn't know what was going on. The mother was distraught, of course. And I don't know why I did what I did, still to this day. But I wanted to get that dead child out of there, away from those other children, away from the mother. So the closest thing to me was a couple of plastic shopping bags. Like when you go to the store, wherever that may be, that's what they put your groceries in. So I grabbed one and stuck it in another, and I put that child in there, and I went out the door. So EMS comes driving up, and I hand them that bag, that child. Now, that's 26 years ago. And I don't think I suffer from PTSD. I don't believe that I do, but I tell you this, every time I go shopping and I get my groceries, I think about that day because of holding that bag. The guy that you saw on the cover of the magazine at the Oklahoma City bombing, he's a friend of mine. His name is Chris Fields. His whole family fell apart subsequent to that. He had guilt because he was the last person that had touched that child intimately. Not even her mother was allowed to because the feds were there and they said the child was evidence. He went through his struggles, had his suicidal thoughts and everything else, and never realized he had PTSD until several years later when he went to help a friend pour some concrete at his house, and the smell of that fresh concrete was a trigger to him because of all the concrete dust that happened during the Oklahoma City bombing that day. You remember the baby Jessica, for those of us who are old enough to remember that. I'll wrap up, Chairman. You remember her. Those two guys that went down and got that child out of that well both committed suicide subsequent to that. We're not asking for anything other than this. It's what the law provides for today. I'm asking you the only change in this is instead of us, when a person has a problem, instead of us having to fight the EAP or the workers' comp or whatever it may be, is make it a pathway for us to go get help. And then if there are questions that someone is not telling the truth or whatever, then it is rebuttable on the employer side. But don't put it out on us because so many people are not seeking help because of that. And it's no different than an injury. If I'm in a fire and the roof collapses on me and it breaks my back or whatever the case may be, it's the same exact thing. And again, I'm asking you to pass this to the floor. It came out of the Senate unanimously with co-authors. We cleaned it over there. And it's as clean as the Board of Health right now, and I'm asking you to send it just like it is to the House floor and send it back over to the Senate, and I'd be happy to ask you any questions, answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Representative Simon and then Representative Seabaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for my friend here who came and spoke, and I just want to first, if you can come back to the table. Yes, you. No, the one behind you. And I spent, let me preface this, I spent 8 years, my first 8 years in this legislature in health and welfare. And first, let me just say, Colonel Cox wrote a book. And I don't know if many people know that, but I personally read that book. And I read it so I commend him on his heroics. But I know personally from reading that book, a lot of what he says in here today is very personal and very true. So that book has taught me in many ways to how a different way of looking at things. And with that said, my first 8 years of here, I was on health and welfare, and we dealt with mental illnesses and various illnesses along the way. And where I'm not really asking about this bill personally, I mean today on this with this question, you hit on a little bit. When we talk about illnesses and health, we're always talking about treatment. What are we addressing from a fire department standpoint of view or a police department standpoint of view, prevention in a sense, to get it before it gets to needing help? I think you hit on a little bit, and I'm just wondering if there is a movement or if there's even a discussion, because as Senator Gatti said, early prevention cures it, but if you even get it before it gets to that point, it's even that much more curable. So I just want to see, is that a discussion that's taking place?
Yes, sir, Representative Simon. Some of the larger departments in the state right now have what's called CISM teams. And those firefighters, and I'm speaking for fire service, I don't know so much about the police service, but they're trained, they go to classes, they're trained, and they're basically critical incident stress debriefers, counselors, peer support, or whatever the case may be, because they've changed names all the time. And in our world, and this, we don't speak to outsiders. Police officers don't speak to outsiders. We will talk to one another. We will share that. Matter of fact, we share too much sometimes, but anyway, we will talk to one another, but not outsiders. And what we've done is we're taking our own funds now, and I'm not talking about the city's funds, and I'm not talking about the department's funds. We're taking our own personal funds now from our associations and everything else and providing for that peer counseling training so that we can have more peer counselors across the departments, across the state, so that instead of someone, I witnessed 6 suicides, not witnessed, I have witnessed suicide before, but in my department, I've gone through 6 suicides. And in retrospect, I can look back and tell you now that I recognize that they had all gotten to the same place. They had all gotten where they had pulled away from everybody else, because we're a close-knit group. Now, we'll fight in the yard, and then we'll dust each other off and go in and make a cup of coffee. That's what we do. But they had all separated from everybody else at the station. They didn't hang out with anybody. They didn't cook, didn't eat with us, didn't do anything. And now, in retrospect, I look back and say, okay, I can see it now. Well, we're training people now to recognize those things ahead of time and say, hey, let's have a conversation. And then say, you know what? You really need to go speak with someone. You're having a tough time. And we're doing that to save ourselves. What we're asking is, and in this bill is, give us the next step, because if it comes to that, let's make the past move. Because
I'm not making judgment on the bill with the question. I'm really, it's a true concern I have. I mean, like I said, we've dealt with this in all spectrums of society, not just here today with the fire department. And this is a live and real problem that's across the spectrum. And one of our pushes, my push is, all right, we know it's a problem, and we know we need to treat it, and we know that we have our mental health treatment nationwide is not where it needs to be. With that said, is there anything we can do to help from getting? I mean, we do it when we have illnesses with flus and whatever else. We vaccinate. We you know, what are we doing? Is there anything that we can do? And I would like to have the man in the middle speak if he could, because I think he hit on it a little bit. And I forget your name. If you would just give it to me again. I forgot.
Danny Adams.
Danny?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, for coming. And like I said, you hit on it, and I just want to know, is there a discussion, and are we, you know, I guess you are, but I just want you to fill in if you would.
Yeah, yes. And I think Matt McKinney has spoke before. He's also a trainer. Well, we train first responders, police, fire, EMS, even some our lane people, how to take care of themselves. One of the things Chad talked about is the suicides that we experienced in Baton Rouge.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after our last suicide, I told Chad, I said, look, I have this great course that I can teach people how to talk about suicide. We did that in 2010 and 11. We have not had a suicide, but we have had some saves. We've had several firefighters get saved because we broke the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew about suicide.
And I think that's important.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to break this stigma. Also, you know, even with I'm on the International Behavioral Health Board.
Mm-hmm.
We developed a course, peer support. It's on fire. We have 30-something instructors, and we're booked to November already.
And he said that was you said your major departments are doing that.
Yes.
Do you see that to where some of the smaller, more rural, they witness just as, you know?
Yeah. So some of our things in the rural areas is where it's hurting the most. That's where you have the less resources. I'm a mental health advocate.
That's what it all comes down to, usually is resources.
Yes, resources, absolutely. So the resources are laxed in the rural areas. And I did a suicide prevention class for Jonesboro Police Department after a suicide. The chief did not want to lose another member. It's a small department. It's a small town. But it was that important for him not to lose another officer. And it was a very successful training.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your testimony today, and I just wanted to make the case that as much as I appreciate the bill, I also appreciate the effort that needs to go in front, and if we can just bring awareness to it and take that stand, because if we prevent illness, that goes a lot further than trying to correct illness. As far as when you talk about cost, you talk about time, you're talking about, and you're just talking about the personal, tragedy that goes along with it. So thank you for your time, and thank you for your testimony.
I'll just add this because
thank you, Representative Simon.
Just quickly, Representative Simon, can we prevent this like we prevent the flu? We can vaccinate all the children with the flu vaccine, but there is no way to take out the inherent danger and the things. Yeah, and so the prevention does go back to early detection and early treatment. unlike the flu, you can get the vaccine and never get the flu. But most firemen will need counseling, and the flu in this situation is suicide. Once they're at that level, we have to back it up. So I too struggle with, isn't there a way to just weed this out of their profession? And there really
well, I wasn't going there. That's not what. I hope you don't take it. That's where I was going.
No, sir.
I mean, my whole concern is the holistic health of the department, and that's goes along with not only treatment but prevention, if you could, in a sense. And they talked about 30 years ago you dealt with it one way, and here we are now. So here we know we got a problem. How we evolved in those 30 years to address that problem is kind of where I was going. So like I said, I didn't want you to take it that I was going after the bill. I was just going from my past experiences in mental health and then the discussions we had.
Yes, sir.
Where we're going, and if we can expand that. And I represent a rural area, so that's why I brought it up. What can we do to get it where we need to do? And because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing.
Correct.
We want healthy people. So
thank you, Representative Simon. Gentlemen and ladies, we do have several other recitations or questions. Let me underscore, and I want to be emphatic, we cannot adequately give this subject the time that's needed. We've been allotted a very short period of time. So I would ask and encourage everyone, we have, if you will, not even a complete appreciation for what they have experienced and continue to experience. So that being said, we do have to go to the floor shortly. We've not heard from the opponents and what have you, but Representative Seabaugh has a comment, and Representative Hoard. Representative Seabaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for bringing the bill and bringing for awareness to this issue. Like I think Representative Cox made a comment, he was kind of surprised it wasn't already covered. I was too, to be honest with you. This is something it's very real. It's been associated with military for decades. We all know, we've heard stories here today, first responders deal with traumatic events on a daily basis. And I commend you for what you do, and thank you for your service, and understand this is a very real problem. So I like the concept of the bill. The only question I have about the bill is I've looked at how some other states have dealt with it, and they all relate it to a single incident, a single traumatic event. Everybody who's come to testify has testified about a single traumatic event. This bill doesn't limit it to a single traumatic event. It simply says if you're diagnosed with it, it's presumed to be related to your employment. And I guess I have a little bit of question about the broadness of the scope. And I would just ask you, when you drafted the bill, why it was not limited to a single event, which is, I believe, how other states have addressed it.
Because I think the bill tracks DSM-5, and DSM-5 has recently been updated, and PTSD can be, I think under Section A, B, and C of the DSM, it can be attributed to an accumulative event, or it can be an acute event, so chronic or acute. But irregardless, I think where we kind of ended up as we kind of cobbled together the language was that the presumption is rebuttable. And so you have folks that serve on the police department that have seen a lot of stuff over the years, and they have something that breaks the camel's back, a straw. Then you have some younger folks that we talked to that had one horrific event that kind of met the criteria. So the DSM has either an acute definition or a chronic definition. But once again, I think that's why we made it it's not an irrebuttable presumption, it's a rebuttable presumption in the law. So, but that most of that language, I believe, was taken from Florida, and it was based on and I believe Judge Keller can testify some more of information for that.
Good morning, Chairman, Representative Seabaugh. In answer to your question, in Louisiana, we have what we call physical mental claims, and we have what we call mental claims. So currently, a claim for PTSD that's caused by a physical accident is compensable. It is also compensable if it's caused by no accident, but it's what we describe as mental. In most states, there is no claim for mental. As in Florida, when they had the Pulse nightclub mass shooting, the officers who were involved in that who claimed PTSD as a result of recovering those 49 bodies that were killed could not receive workers' compensation benefit because Florida did not recognize a mental injury that was not caused by a physical injury. So they could not recover. In Louisiana, you can recover for PTSD if you have a PTSD that's simply a mental claim, as has been described by the firemen. What the bill seeks to do, in addition to providing coverage for a mental claim, is to give the firefighters a presumption that any PTSD that they incur that was occasioned by work that happened during the work or for a certain period of time after work was presumptively caused by their work environment. And what the presumption does is actually take into consideration the risk and stresses that are inherent in the work that they do. And it gives them a leg up, so to speak, on the proof of the PTSD having been caused by their work environment. They can prove it now. It is a claim that can be presented to workers' compensation courts now. You have to prove it by preponderance of the evidence. But this bill will give them a presumption, rebuttable, as the senator said, that it was caused by work. And when you present evidence to the contrary, it can be rebutted.
Yeah, and I understand that. The presumption is really the only part about the bill that I had a problem with, because it is a very broad presumption, and you even go so far as to limit the evidence that can be presented to rebut the presumption. Like, one of the things not listed and not admissible to rebut the presumption is the lack of a traumatic event at work. If the bill were to pass like it is, and someone has been on leave, if they haven't say they had a sickness, or got the flu, something like that, and they were off work for several months,
I wouldn't be opposed to any amendment if you feel uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, I just look at it. It's just a little bit broad, and
I can appreciate that.
But if somebody's off work and it's something, it's not necessarily, you do allow a traumatic event, but if they're off work for a long time, for they have the flu or whatever, and then they come back with PTSD, there's a presumption that it's related, and evidence of a lack of an incident is not necessarily included. So I just have a problem with the broadness of the presumption. But overall, I like where you're going with it, and I certainly am not going to try to defer the bill or anything. I know we're short on time today, but I would work with any amendment to fine tune that. We did not want this to be broad. We told Senator Peacock we would keep it narrow. We didn't want to involve retirement. We didn't want to involve anything where the presumption would become irrebuttable. And because, there's two sides of this coin. You want to make sure that if folks are saying they have PTSD and they don't, which is rare in this people group. I mean, we see it in other employment-related situations, but in this group, these people want to work and they don't want to talk about their injury. So the goal of this bill, and I wouldn't mind any amendment to clear that up, is really for the initial process of filing the claim not to become a roadblock to the immediate treatment that is needed. So I would be happy with any amendment to clear that up. Well, and bring up Senator Peacock is another question. I saw that there was an actuarial note saying it had no effect on the retirement system. Was there a fiscal note or anything requested regarding an increase in cost to the locals? Because they're going to have to pay the cost. You're obviously adding coverage on a policy, so there is going to be an increased premium cost to the locals. Has that been addressed at any point in the process?
It has. And Judge Keller, do you want to address that, or do you want me to address that?
And I think they will come to the table to articulate that.
Okay, so somebody has looked into it, you're aware of? Okay, well, that's fine.
They have a red card.
Okay.
And I think the status, just to be brief, was that mental is already covered. Mm-hmm. So if a fireman needs treatment January 1st of 2019, and he battles 2 years in court, and he finally gets approved for the PTSD, then that cost is there. If he needs treatment on January 2019 and this presumption is in place, he's going to get his treatment. And what we found when I was a workers' comp judge is that folks got their treatment or their surgery early, they tended to go back to work. It was the litigation process that tied them up out of work for a long time. Somebody needs a knee surgery and we don't get it for 2 years, well, now they need a knee replacement and they're out of work. If somebody needs mental health, we need to get it to them immediately. That way they can return to the workforce. Our return to work numbers on this issue are abysmal. So I agree with you that we're not creating a new claim, a new right of action. What we're saying is currently you have status for mental, any walk of life. We're looking at the subset of those folks who we've identified as a very high instance of PTSD, and these guys are going to court handing off the same 100 articles to the judges saying this is related, and the psychologist having to come testify saying, yeah, I met with him 50 times, this is from work, and so this just shifts the burden back. But it's a rebuttable presumption. But I don't think there was a fiscal note requested because this is already covered in Louisiana. We're just saying that they get their coverage quicker. And that will also cause a weeding out of the fake ones, too. That's going to happen a lot quicker, too.
Okay, so your understanding is the coverage is already provided in a policy that they would have bought. The only difference is we're creating a presumption and making it easier to prove the claim. Is that essentially it?
And so what will happen is the weeding out process or the payment process will happen just earlier on, but we're not increasing payment. In fact, I think what would happen over time is when these guys get treatment early, a couple $1,000s for counseling maybe, rather than a lifetime of medication if they wait 2 years to get approved for it. So I would just share that with you. We had that debate. I can't remember where we had it. This bill's kind of winded through for a while, but I can't say anybody disagree with that. If anybody else will say anything, they can.
All right.
Okay, thank you. That's all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions? In favor, because we have to be quick, Nick Felton, Jonathan Pizzolatto, Charles, not yet, nobody has offered a minute, Charles Davoli, Matt Lauterbach, Justin Kellogg, Michael Pertinostro, thank you for the phonetics, Nick DeGuster, Ethel Young, Courtney Butcher, Steve Pennell, Darrell Bosco, Curtis Beauregard, Jason Sanchez, Michael Kimball, Jonathan Knight, Corey Sharp, Brendan Hood, Danny Adams, if you've heard from, David T. Young, Julie Cherry, Adam Kimball, Louis Rainey, and Sean Spillman. All of those were in favor, and you've heard from Judge Keller who offered information. Now we will have Senator, the opposition, Mr. Wayne Fontana and Karen White, who are here and would like to speak. We also have Patrick Robinson, Gary Potero, Troy Prevost, and Jim Patterson. Yes, good afternoon now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. I'll try to be quick. I can't start without saying, first of all, on behalf of, I'm here on behalf of Lobby, but also personally, we need to register our absolute utmost respect for police officers, firemen, first responders. We know the important work that they do. We appreciate and we honor that service. I have law enforcement in my family. Let me also say absolutely clearly, I don't think there's any disagreement with anyone in this room that this is a serious problem. It's a problem locally, it's a problem statewide, it's a problem nationally. PTSD is a very real thing, and it's something that needs to be addressed quickly and effectively, and it needs to be cared for quickly and effectively. That said, it's important to note, and Judge Keller already said it, that PTSD is covered under our Workers' Compensation Act at this moment. At this moment, if an employee comes in and makes a claim and says he has PTSD, by a preponderance of the evidence, a little shade more, a little hair more than 50%, he's able to prove that he is covered under the Workers' Compensation Act. It's also ought to be noted that he's covered for two different ways. If he has that single traumatic accident, PTSD develops from it, he's covered there. If it is an occupational disease, under occupational disease, if it's a cumulative type effect, PTSD, that's covered under existing law as well. we heard something about Florida. Florida did not recognize this for firefighters. They had to change their law to simply recognize it. Louisiana has recognized it for years. The other thing to know is that with respect to quick treatment, Louisiana for a long time has had choice of physician given to employees. So from the get-go, if an employee feels that he has PTSD that's related to his employment, he immediately has the choice of his own physician, and that includes psychiatrists and psychologists, and he can go to a doctor quickly. And employers have to allow him to be evaluated. Even if they decide they're going to contest it later, they've got to approve that treatment. They've got to allow that initial treatment to occur. And if PTSD, we've all heard a lot of times that PTSD, it needs to be recognized and diagnosed early. Our system allows for that early diagnosis. It allows for the employee to get to the doctor quickly. As Representative Seabaugh noted, our biggest problem is not in the recognition of this covered under the Workers' Compensation Act. It is this very broad presumption. This presumption, we believe, what we know it will do, it will shift the burden of proof over to the employer, but it also shifts the burden of proof over to the employer and creates a completely new standard for that employer to rebut it. And the example that Representative Seabaugh gives is, I guess, a good one. You could have an individual who could be in an administrative role and not have been subjected to stress, but he gets that presumption. And then the employer would have to come in and show by clear and convincing evidence that the employment had absolutely nothing to do with his condition. It's an extraordinarily high burden to overcome. We just think that the law as it exists, by just having the employee prove by the preponderance of the evidence, is the best way to do it. To adopt this would be to set aside this class of workers from every other worker in the state of Louisiana, create a different standard for them, create presumptions that don't exist for other people. I'm not sure what the cost of this will be to the state or to municipalities, but certainly the state, parishes, cities, and municipalities and all their taxpayers would surely see cost increases with this presumption being adopted and that very high standard to be able to overcome the presumption. Very clearly, I think we need better prevention. I think we need better treatment. We need better awareness. We need less stigma. But this bill, we don't believe, is the solution to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karen White, Executive Counsel for the Louisiana Municipal Association. I have to, again, iterate what's been said. These are our friends, our neighbors, our family. We work with the firefighters on a majority of legislation that comes before you. In fact, last year we worked closely with them to expand the scope of presumed cancer with relation to workers' compensation. So it is not a situation where we are generally averse. I think Representative Seabaugh brilliantly articulated what our concern is, and really it is me coming here to put this on the record to make sure that this committee is making an informed decision with regard to the legislation as it is written. And it is simply the fact that given the breadth, the very broad nature of the presumption and the very limited nature of what evidence may be presented to rebut that presumption, it's going to result in an increase in cost to these workers' compensation and with regards to our particular program, a WC indemnification program. And that cost, unfortunately, the reality of it is it doesn't just dissipate into the ether. That cost has to be passed on. And so as we have seen these incremental additions of presumptions and rebuttable presumptions, every time it happens, there is an additional cost to the system. So it really is, again, to make sure that the committee is aware that there will be some fiscal ramifications, especially if the presumption remains as broad as it is, and again, the clear and convincing standard tied to a limited evidentiary scope. So, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have as well.
There is one quick question. Representative Seabaugh.
Actually, my question is for you. I had an amendment that was passed out, as I believe it's amendment set number 2781. Would this be an appropriate time to take up the amendment?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless you have any questions from...
No, I mean...
Okay.
No, I do not. Hey, members, hold
on just
do you want me to hit
please.
it, or...?
Yeah. We'll let the Madam Attorney hit it, then you may assist her if you need to. Madam Attorney, on the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, amendment number 2781. This amendment has been posted online. It's now currently being distributed to you all. This is a set of amendments, amendment 1 through 21. We're going to take out on page 2, line 5, after association, we're adding in caused by an event occurring in the course and scope of employment in which the preponderance of evidence indicates that the event was a substantial contributing factor. On page 2, line 24, we're deleting the remainder of that line. On page 2, we're deleting lines 25 through 29 in their entirety. On page 3, we're deleting lines 1 through 10 in their entirety. On page 3, line 13, we're deleting that line in its entirety. Also, on page 4, line 24, we're deleting the remainder of that line in its entirety. And those are the amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. And I think she did a great job summing it, but Representative Seabaugh, if you just want to hit that highlight, because I think what your concern was has been allayed with this amendment.
Yeah, am I on?
Now you are.
All right. Essentially, it does two things. It adds the provision, which for the member's sake, I copied, I think, verbatim from the Texas law on the same provision, which said it limits it to a single traumatic event, I believe is the word we used, as opposed to the presumption that it's just going to be related to employment without any other proof. And then the other amendments, I think, addressed the presumption itself. So it addressed the single contributing factor and the presumption.
Thank you, Representative Seabaugh. As people are perusing through, although it's been available for a minute, Senator, any? While you are getting yourselves situated, there is a question on the amendment. Representative Amity.
Representative Seabaugh, if I understand your explanation just now, because I'm still trying to mark my paper, does this eliminate the cumulative PTSD and make the bill only handle PTSD that seems to be caused by a single event?
So
yes,
the answer is I believe yes. That actually was my intent. Is to have it related to. I mean, again, in workers' comp, usually you've got a similar to the argument or the debate we had the other day over the hearing loss. You can have hearing loss. You have a claim for hearing loss caused by a single event. You currently don't have a claim for hearing loss caused over a long period of time. And essentially, that was my intent, was to relate it to a single event. Everybody here that testified today testified about a single event. I don't think any of them would have a problem meeting this burden. It would just do away with the presumption that it was caused by, that it was related to their employment, and it would it would actually allow the defense in the case to present evidence to rebut it that was not allowed under the current bill. Or, the current bill, not the current law.
You have a follow-up, Representative Nominee? Let me find you. Where are you? There we go.
Okay. So it's my understanding that based on scenarios, as we've heard in testimony today, that the triggering event that causes the person to say, I need care, could be that single event. Okay. Thank you, sir. That's all, Mr. Chair.
And I'll just,
Thank you, Representative Amity. Senator Gatti.
And I know I'm just reading this, and I understand what Representative Seabaugh is trying to do. And I think you're correct, Representative Amade, is that the mosquito down the throat That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. But the body bags from years ago, that's what we call the accumulation factor. Those are all impressions that the psychologist will have to analyze to determine if it's PTSD. I think Representative Seaball's concern is quite frankly when we've been working on and trying to figure out how to draft the language. I think the Texas language is, I don't think it destroys a fireman who needs to go and get help immediately. And I'll just say this: we heard some testimony from Lobby. And I kind of struggle with it because these are firemen, policemen we're talking about. These aren't business people. Secondly, this is a special class of people. We already have recognized them as a special class with the Heart and Lung Act and the Cancer Act. And so these guys are different. And we can't safety train around the stuff these guys see. We just can't do it. In this job, they're going to see bad stuff. And nextly, I mean, the Chief Association is 100% behind this. Those are the employers. That's the boss of these people. The bosses are saying, my employee needs help. That doesn't happen a lot in workers' comp. I'm getting that the employer sides with the employee and says, get this man help. So I don't think the amendment destroys the intent of the bill. I think, in fact, it might tighten it up. And if it allows us to get it out of committee, I'll be okay with that.
Thank you, Senator Gatti. Any other questions? There appears to be none. Senator Representative Seaball has offered an amendment to Senator Gatti's bill. Is there any further discussion? Any objection? There being none, that amendment is adopted. Is there anything else? We have one more amendment. Madam Attorney.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, amendment number 2799 is currently being distributed to you. On page 3, between lines 10 and 11, and on page 5, between lines 18 and 19, and on page 7, after line 13, we're inserting a post-traumatic stress injury that arises solely from a legitimate personnel action such as a transfer, promotion, demotion, or termination is not a compensable injury pursuant to this chapter. Thank you.
That's not what we're talking about. That's fine.
I think the amendment has been read. Mr. Vice Chair, you want to go into it? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think it does anything. This is what the Representative Miguez.
Yep. Senator, this is something we picked up from another code in another state. I think it's pretty clean up.
Sounds like Texas or somewhere.
Yeah, some more Texas language. Just basically says that those departments are free to transfer, promote, demote, terminate any PTSD or any claim that results directly solely on their termination or their demotion, not related to the events we talked about earlier. Just cleans it up and makes sure it's tightly,
I appreciate
narrowly.
it. And I understand that. I understand the amendment. It doesn't take away from the right of our firemen and policemen to file their claim. And but it would. I don't think any of these guys be filing a claim because they got transferred or demoted. I think they're filing.
Exactly. I don't think it hurts your what you're trying to do at all.
Appreciate the amendment, Representative Miguez.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Representative Miguez has offered amendment. Is there any discussion or objection? There being none, Representative Miguez's amendment to Senate Bill 88 is adopted. Senator Gatti, I think we have a pretty good posture.
Thank you. I'll just 2-second closing. Every once in a while God winks at you, and that's called a coincidence. I don't think it's any coincidence that the first thing that happened in our meeting today was Representative Bagley let us know about a fireman in his district that took his life. We could have stopped this committee right there and just move forward. But Mr. Chairman, I know you've got important business, but thank you and thank this committee, every one of you, for allowing these men to come forward, because this is part of their recovery. Part of their recovery is coming to speak to y'all. So thank you for your time, and I would ask that you move favorable on this bill.
Thank you, Senator, and thank the men and women, the men who came forward, but we know there are women as well out there who put their lives on the line every day. Thank you for what you do. SB 88, is there a motion? Representative Miguez has...
It's 107.
107, excuse me. SB 107 has been moved favorably by Representative Cox some time ago with amendments. Is there any discussion or objection? Yeah, like an hour ago. There being none, SB 107 with amendments is reported favorably. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, members.